Welcome to How to Cook That. I'm Reardon. For all of you directioners out there, today we're going to make a One Direction cake which has the logo on the top as well as on the inside of the cake. And to make this you're going to need 2 vanilla packet cakes and 1 red velvet cake. And I'd usually make these from scratch, but today I've got a little helper, so we're using packets. You're also going to need some red fondant, which I suggest you buy pre-coloured, and you'll need some cream cheese frosting and some Italian meringue frosting. I'll place a link to those recipe videos in the description below this one. If you don't have a rectangular cake tin, you can make a rectangle frame out of cardboard. It doesn't need to have a base, just the sides, and secure it in place with staples and string. And make sure you use plain thick cardboard. Don't use ones that have shiny printing on them because they've got a plastic coating. And then put that on a baking tray. Line it with baking paper so that there's no gaps underneath, and then you can bake it in that. The cake tin that I used was 16 centimetres by 24 centimetres for both of the cakes, so the vanilla cake's just a bit thicker because I used 2 cake mixes for that one. For your red velvet cake, you need to cut it into 2 layers. Don't flatten it first because we want the top layer to be rounded. And then trim off your sides, cutting off about 1 centimetre off each so that you're left with a neat rectangle, and cut it in half lengthwise. One of these won't be needed, so you can set that aside for later. Take one of the rectangles, place it in the middle of the domed piece and cut down each side, and that's what you're going to use to form your D. So move the other pieces out of the way and trim down the sides of the cake so that from the end it looks like the diagram shown. Then take one of your rectangles and cut it into 2 even layers, so they're going to be quite thin. With your vanilla cake, trim the thin layer of brown off the top, then trim the edges and cut it into 2 layers like you did with the red velvet cake. Then place one of your red velvet strips on top and leave about a 2 centimetre border of cake either side of it and cut down through both layers of cake, so you end up with 2 fat and 2 skinny rectangles. Take one of the fat rectangles and cut it into 2 layers. Use one of those thin layers and cover it with a small amount of cream cheese frosting all the way to the edges. Cut one of the skinny rectangles into 2 layers and place it down the middle. Then take one of your leftover pieces of red velvet cake and cut 2 thin strips that you can place either side of that vanilla cake that you've just put down the middle. If any of it breaks off, just add a bit more at the end. Add more frosting to the centre section only, and then put one of your thin red cake layers on top and use a knife to push the edges into place. Then cut another red strip from the piece you were using before and place that on the top of the cake, so that will form the bottom of your one. Put frosting along the exposed strip as shown, then add another thin layer of vanilla cake and frost over the top, and fill in the sides with frosting, and that's your number 1 finished. Add your wide thin layer of vanilla for the space in between the 1 and the D and cover with a thin layer of frosting. Now you're going to place the other thin layer of red across the middle, more frosting. Now take your other skinny strip of vanilla cake and cut the corners off as shown in the diagram. Put that in the middle of the cake and yes, add more frosting. Then take your D piece of red velvet cake that we cut in the beginning and turn it so it is the rounded side down on the bench and cut out a triangular wedge from the middle. Flip it over and put it on top of your cake. Now take your remaining thick piece of vanilla cake and cut out a thin rounded wedge from the middle. Add more frosting and then put that on top. Place some more frosting in the gaps on the side. Clean up your work area and then carefully transfer the cake to a platter, holding it by both the sides because you need to tip it over onto the platter. Neaten up the ends by trimming off a really thin piece, and now you can either cover the whole cake in white fondant or you can use Italian meringue frosting like I am. I like the taste of this frosting and it gives you that brilliant white look. Just add spoonfuls onto the cake and then smooth out your surface using a palette knife, or you can use the back of a long knife. Use some wet paper towel to clean up your platter. Then roll out some red fondant onto some non-stick baking paper. You're going to need to print out the One Direction logo on the computer in a size that will fit your cake, and use that as a template to cut your letters out of the red fondant. Remove the excess fondant and then use your knife to roughen it up a bit so it looks more like the logo. Using your knife, slide it underneath and lift up your letters onto the cake, and then make any adjustments you need to get it exactly into the right place. Then I used a small amount of the marshmallow icing on a knife and just kind of brushed it onto the letters so that you get the look of the logo. Put your top red strip into place and you've finished. Then when you slice into your cake, everybody gets the logo on the slice that they get. Thanks for watching. If you have any requests, leave it in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. There's a new video every week.